when we realize that these ancient sites are just advanced technology on a gigantic scale. If you just look at that, you see these obelisks, giant antennas sticking up into the sky. And the obelisks ring like bells. In fact, this one, I was there with Hugh Newman in 2012, and I went on the one side and I said, just tap this thing, with another stone, just tap it. I put my head against it, and it was unbelievable. It was like listening to one of my ringing stones in my museum. This thing rings like a bell. And I went, oh my God, it's the same bloody thing. These are just giant antennae, either putting stuff up or bringing stuff down from the sky. And I realized then, I started looking at it, these temples in Egypt, they're not what we're told they are. They're not temples, they're not places of worship to offer food or kiss butt of the gods or none of that stuff. It's just our baby-like perception of what's going on here. Too many pillars, not enough space, and when you start looking at just like everything else, when you start looking at the aerial pictures, your whole perspective changes. And that's when I started to realize, oh my goodness, this is not what we thought it was. Now that I know about the stone circles, I know about the pyramids, I know about Stonehenge, it's all to do with resonators and resonating devices. This is no different. We're just looking at giant templates for giant circuit boards. And that's what these are. Just giant circuit boards for technology of a size that we can't imagine. And microprocessors suddenly become very large macroprocessors, and these so-called worshipping places for worshipping, like the Parthenon and those two on the left, those are just gigantic macroprocessors that are part of a giant circuit board. And the pyramids are no different. Just the comparison this to that, it's almost, like, really? And when you start researching what's around the Great Pyramid, you realize that this is all just part of it, all to do with resonance. Angkor Wat, when you combine water and silica, you're dealing with the two most abundant elements on earth, all to do with energy, energetic, storing of memory, storing of knowledge. You know that water actually holds even more memory than silica or than quartz. And even Saksai Huaman is not a fortress, a mountaintop fortress. It's just a giant circuit board on top of a mountain. And those walls, those very incredible walls that lead up to it, there are 3 walls there, which means there are 2 channels. And I suspect the reason they got that weird shape is so that they actually create when the wind blows there's a prevailing wind that comes from the edge of that mountain. And when that wind blows in there, it probably creates a specific frequency based on the shape of those walls. And that frequency is then channeled into that machine on top of the mountain. Borobudur in Indonesia is just a spectacular example of a machine that harnesses all the energy up focuses it up and amplifies it right up to the top, where it shoots it up into the sky. For what? Your guess is as good as mine right now. And human sound and energy is possibly what holds up the matrix, or that grid in the sky. And we start seeing this when we recognize that this is the Parthenon in Greece. Again, you've got that giant macro processor in the middle. It's not a temple, it's just that was a circuit board itself, but it's really badly destroyed. And that circuit board is connected to these perfect amphitheaters. There's one here, there's another one there. And those amphitheaters, you should know by now, they're incredibly, very powerful acoustic devices. You can whisper on that stage and you can hear it everywhere. So you fill that with people, you make them shout like our people do at Manchester, somewhere at the stadium. I'm not sure if I should say Manchester City or Manchester United, don't want to get into trouble. At one of the soccer stadiums, you know how loud it gets in there? You can't hear yourself think on that field. The players have to shout at each other because the crowd is so loud. So the energy of our human voices is so powerful when it's amplified through the resonance of the crowd, and just putting the numbers of people up. You put a bunch of people in that amphitheater, you make them scared or excited, you make them cry or clap their hands or scream and shout. That energy gets channeled into the circuit board, and it starts the circuit board through the energy of the people. So here's another example. There's your circuit board really broken down. There's your amphitheater, and beautifully connected into the circuit board by a lovely row of vibrating pillars. Here's another one. Circuit board on top of the mountain, really badly destroyed. There's your amphitheater on the side. That seems to have been rebuilt in more recent times, but there it is. And here's another one. This is in Algeria, North Africa. There's amphitheaters right in the middle of the circuit board. They didn't play around. They really just put it right where they needed it. And nothing has changed in 2018. Nothing has changed. We just keep plodding along and we have no clue what the bloody hell is going on. The temples have just become churches with giant steeples. Who came up with the design of a church and the tower and the steeple going up into the sky? Who came up with that concept? Really? Why? Why isn't it a hut, a mud hut, or a grass hut, or a flat roof? Or why is it these? Because they knew what they've been doing for thousands of years. People create sound and energy, and they're filled with fear. They clap their hands. They do all kinds of stuff in these places. And all that energy is channeled up into the sky, non-stop. And when you look at the mosques, some of the mosques are actually mind-boggling, because they actually have these little towers on them, and they have these little balls on top of the towers. And I've noticed that the balls range from 1 to 5, I believe, balls. So it's almost like they're creating a different pulse as they're sending the sound frequency up into the sky. So they're creating a different pulse rate. Poof, 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 poof. I don't know. You figure that out. And this place here is obviously, that's the big daddy of them all. And nothing has changed. Business centers, cities are just giant energy grids, just circuit boards making huge amount of sound and noise. Every building vibrates. You've got a beautiful example in London, that giant obelisk in London. It's just a perfect example. Generating huge amounts of energy, noise, and guess what? Just like the stone circles, the cities are also connected by channels that keep making a noise and channeling the noise. We call them highways. Never stops making a noise. And that's exactly what I believe Morpheus meant when he said, people are the source of energy. When I first saw the Matrix, I had no idea what the hell Morpheus was talking about. But whoever wrote this and whoever presented the information into the Matrix movie clearly had a much better understanding of this than I had at the time. So it is the creation, or creation is all to do with sound and resonance, and that is the most spectacular thing that we can wrap our head around. I'm now getting closer to the break, so don't get nervous. We're almost going to have a break so you can stretch your legs and rest your mind a bit. But it's all about energy, frequency, and thought. And that brings with itself the cylindrical or cyclical conundrum, the chicken and egg story. Like, what came first, the energy, the frequency, or was it the thought of the creator? Because that's all to do with frequency and energy and sound and resonance. Or is it unity consciousness, that's the primordial source of everything? And where does the unity consciousness come from? What is consciousness, really? Do we even know how to define that? It's an amazing thing that we're just waking up and starting to contemplate these things. And you know, the bravest thing that any one of us can do is to say, I don't know. I really don't know. Because you'll find a lot of very special experts out there and people that claim they know everything. And they'll tell you what consciousness is, and they'll tell you what enlightenment is, and they'll tell you about this, and they'll bring you to seminars and teach you about how to become enlightened. They don't even know or give you a definition of what enlightenment is. They don't know. I will tell you what the definition of enlightenment is. No, just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you what I think enlightenment is a little later when we get to that section. Because it's just been an interesting process of putting all these, again, like I call connecting the dots. As we start connecting the dots and the picture gets brighter and brighter and brighter, and eventually we can't see because it's so bloody bright. Most important thing I've learned in the last 30 years is that everything we've been taught is a lie. 30 years ago, I think I read that somewhere, and I thought, what an arrogant prick. You know, whoever said that, I said, it must be a real arrogant prick, really. I'm an educated guy, I've got a degree from university, I know stuff. And 10 years later, I was not so confident anymore, and I thought, well, maybe some of it might not be exactly very accurate or true, but then 10 years ago, I started to realize, you know what? I pretty much don't believe anything I was taught. And as I stand in front of you today, not only do I believe that everything we've been told is a lie, I have a lot of evidence to prove that, or to prove it to myself, really. It's up to us. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I think we just have to really satisfy ourselves in our own journeys of discovery. I find it interesting when people send me emails and say, prove to me that you must blah, blah, blah. I go, delete. No, sorry, I'm not going to prove anything to you. It's your life, buddy. You deal with that crap. Feed your own ego. And what I find fascinating is that the bigger the lie, the more we're inclined to believe it. That is the incredible thing. It's the little lies that, we go, come on, really, you got to be kidding. But it's the bigger lies when we start talking about, I'm not even going to go there. History, science, technology, health, biology, genetics, the universe, religion, money. Among those subjects lie some of the biggest lies that have been spun, and those are the foundations of our society today, all founded upon lies, misguidance, manipulation, brainwashing, mind control. I've run out of words. Thank you. You come up with your own words. I need your input here. And one of my best examples to show this is my friend Miho Ledwith. Miho Ledwith is an Irish priest who I got to know very well over the last 10 years. He was the advisor to these guys at the Vatican for 17 years until he met the people from Ramtha School in Yelm, Washington. And within a month he resigned from the Vatican and joined the school of Ramtha, believe it or not, as the advisor to Ramtha. This is a really interesting story. So he now lives in Yelm, Washington. I've stayed with him several times. Incredible. He's a walking encyclopedia. Miho Ledwith is like, it's like the greatest joy to talk to this man. You can open any discussion on any level and he'll go down a deep rabbit hole discussing that subject with you. His knowledge of pretty much any subject is superb. So what he realized, even at a young age at university, when he was studying Hebrew and Sumerian texts and all that stuff, he realized that the opening phrase of the Bible is not what we believe it is. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Because that is not what the Hebrew text says. The Hebrew texts should all begin with the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph. First letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. All Hebrew texts, sacred texts, have to begin with the first letter of the alphabet. And he suddenly realized that that's not the case with the current Hebrew Bible. It begins with the second letter of the alphabet, Beth. And therein lies a big problem. At the moment, the Bible says, Ba Rashit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim wa et ha-iaris, which is a nonsensical, non-grammatical statement in Hebrew. It makes no sense. And it's in that mistranslation that we read the Elohim as God, which is not true, because Elohim is plural for gods. So he realized that somebody messed with us, and it does not begin with A or Aleph. It clearly begins with Ba Rashit. So when he added the A, what does it say? Abba Rashit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim wa et ha-iaris. Abba means father. Father. And suddenly, the opening phrase of the Bible says, the Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And that changes everything. Now, my question is this. Out of the thousands of Hebrew and biblical scholars that should know this, should know that the Hebrew texts should begin with Aleph, how come nobody has brought this up, ever? Until Miho Ledwith points us out. Somewhere, somehow, people have been fooled into believing this, and they don't raise their hand. Or when they do raise their hand, maybe their hands get chopped off. So if they could get away with that lie, you can imagine, this is a big lie. Come on, you've got to admit, this is a huge con of humanity. If they could pull that off, they can pretty much pull anything off. This is the biggest selling book in the history of humankind. Dan Brown's got nothing on the Bible. So they pulled this off. They can pull anything off, and they have. One of my favorite expressions is the 3 holy cows of our education system. And the 3 holy cows: the humans evolved out of apes, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be converted from one form to another. By now you should all know that the theory of evolution remains a theory. It's a nonsensical theory, because that takes creation, or the creator, out of creation. Whether you're a religious person or a non-religious person, creation remains a very important aspect of consciousness. And without consciousness and the process of creation, and us as infinite beings of infinite soul, of blood and flesh and infinite soul. I'm getting tongue-tied here. Evolution is a very important subject that is taught at school as dogma, and people that don't follow that get expelled. And if you want to see how this has affected many, many great minds, there's a great documentary you should see called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Please get that documentary. It'll blow your mind how that has just been a control mechanism in the academia. Middle Tennessee University in 2005 in the USA. 2 undergraduates and 3 high school students propelled sound beyond the speed of light. This was published in 2007 in the American Institute of Physics, where it clearly says the superluminal propagation is realized despite almost 6 orders of magnitude difference between the speed of sound and light. And there's a whole lot of information that was written in that article, very rapidly shelved. Now, when you tell people that sound moves faster than the speed of light, they get very confused. I'll explain to you a little bit later how this works once we get into magnetics and we get into toroidal fields and the nature of reality and how disturbing it is, how little we know about this stuff which we're never taught at school. And we have to teach this to ourselves after we spend all our savings and all our parents' money on an education that turns us into dummies, and we have to go and forget all about that to actually learn what's really true and what's going on in the world. And finally, that we cannot create or destroy energy, and then they tell us we all come out of a big bang. Okay, so let me get this right. So we can't create or destroy energy, but everything started from a big bang. How do you reconcile those two? Well, this is how they get away with it. Like always. They always have a back-end doorstop. They said, what you see, it didn't actually just originate out of nothing. It originated out of the singularity. It's this infinite, tiny little thing that all the energy and everything, in all of creation, all time and everything was squeezed into this little tiny little thing called the singularity. And out of there came everything in creation. Okay, I get it. We didn't create energy. It came out of the singularity. And where did that come from? One of my favorite, I know it's a silly thing, but just like on that note, it's like when the father is taking his son through the museum and he shows him the evolution, see son, this is how we evolved, and they're the gorillas, and look, once we were also gorillas and we evolved out of gorillas. And the son says, so if we evolved out of gorillas, why are there still gorillas? It's an interesting one. So this takes us to what I'm now finding my most exciting bit of research, and it's really captured my imagination, and I'm sure it will yours if it hasn't done that already. And that is the lie about space and cosmos. One of the greatest deceptions. The greatest deceptions. And a great secret is that water is everywhere in the universe. And this is a huge shock to the system. And yet NASA has been telling us this for the last 30 years, that water is everywhere, but we don't pay attention. And once you start looking into the articles that NASA have been putting out there, you realize ocean worlds, water in the solar system and beyond. And then in 2009, I found this article about a sprawling cloud of cold water vapor around a burgeoning solar system in the nearby star of TW Hydra, appropriately named. The water vapor could eventually deliver oceans. Notice the words, the water vapor. It's not some weird form of water, it's water vapor could eventually deliver oceans to dry planets that are forming in the solar system. They're telling us what's going on out there, but we're not listening. We're caught up in the soap opera of NASA's lies, the daily lies that they spin, and we don't get to the subtext, just like the people that get caught up in the soap opera of the storylines in the Bible, and they don't get into the really juicy, meaty stuff that we get from the Bible that tells us pretty much everything. Here we have the famous eye of God, the nebula, actually weeping tears of water. Go and do this research yourself. You'll not believe what you find. Just doing a Google search for water in space. NASA detects oceans inside Saturn's moon. Star found shooting water bullets. NASA confirms the best ever evidence water on Mars. This is just scratching the surface. Water from Orion. Water from Orion? A star found shooting water bullets. What does that mean? Water bullets. A star, shoot a star? Isn't a star like a sun? What is going on here? And then when you start realizing, they tell us that all stars have water. Here they studied 30 embryonic star systems. And they found one of them had definite water. And then they go and saying, the other 29 could very well just have as much water. It was just, they were just pointing in the wrong direction. We couldn't detect the water. They're actually telling us, yes, they all have water. But they don't want to just be that blunt. And stellar sprinkler nourishes galactic garden. Wow, there's a stellar sprinkler out there. And if I told you, if you went down to the pub, right? Try that tonight. No, we're going to have a party afterwards, so we're not going to tonight. But tomorrow, when you go out to the pub, or to your family or friends for dinner, you say, did you know that there's water on the sun? What do you think they're going to say? You're an idiot. You say, no, you're an idiot. You haven't done your homework. Here, I have scientific evidence, because NASA tells me, and Stanford University says that there's water on the sun. Could you ever believe that if I just told you over a beer? No. And this is even better. This is more appropriate university, because they have water in their name. Waterloo University. Says about, talks, the study about, confirms that water exists on the sun. What's going on here, people? What the freaking hell is going on here? Is the universe filled with water? Well, on the left, you really can't see this very well. On the left is a picture of the universe. On the right is a picture of water. It's the same bloody thing. Our entire solar system, our very own solar system, is surrounded by water. They tell us it's ice, but can we believe them? They tell us it's ice because then it's okay to explain the icebergs that come flying in from deep space in the shape of, what are they called? Comets. No? Comets? What thing that leaves ice behind? Comets. Yes, see, I'm getting confused here. Shoot, yeah, those icy things. Comets. And this thing that surrounds our solar system is called the Kuiper Belt. It's just giant, trillions and infinite amount of ice that surrounds our whole solar system. In a disk, by the way. Surrounds our solar system in a disk, right? And then around that whole solar system, we have even more water in the form of ice. It has to be ice. And that thing is called the Oort cloud. So we have our solar system, the sun and the solar planets in this disk. And then this is all surrounded with the ice around the outer limits. And then this is all surrounded in a giant ball of ice called the Oort cloud. And it looks something like that. Suddenly the Bible makes a lot more sense than I ever imagined before. I could never understand this statement. The Spirit of God moved over the waters. I could always ask myself, well, hold on, He hasn't even created anything, and there's already water? How is that possible? So that means hydrogen and oxygen must have been out there somewhere. So where did that hydrogen and oxygen come from? The water. Now we started to get a sense that maybe the Spirit of God moved over the waters, because water is the fundamental substance of creation. We all know and we all say water is sacred. Water has memory. Water has this, and water is energetic, and water keeps us alive. Without water there'd be no life. Suddenly I put a whole different kind of level of cognizance and meaning to that. What water really is, and how sacred water really is. When the Spirit of God moved over the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." Well, today we call that sonoluminescence. When we put sound through a body of water, after a little while, a beautiful vacuum happens. This space appears in the center of that water with a brilliant light inside of it. They call it a star in a jar. It's completely inappropriately named, with completely the wrong explanation, but that's what it's called. Sonoluminescence, creating light out of sound inside of water. Isn't that the opening phrase of the Bible? The Spirit of God moved across the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." It's the sound that's a precursor to everything. Is it possible that water is the stuff that holds the universe together? I'm beginning to believe that that's actually the case. And if space is water, where does the watery space begin? Where is the edge of this watery space? And we read, God placed a firmament in the sky to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters below. And to create the flood, God opened the gates of heaven and let the water pour down on the earth. I have a very different take on all this stuff suddenly, where previously I just thought it was all nonsensical garbage. And I believe that maybe with that disturbing opening line of the Bible, where it tells us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. No, the Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. Now I'm getting a different sense of what's going on. And suddenly the vacuum of space becomes a myth and not a scientific fact. Because no matter how I try to look at this, and if there are physicists in this room, you've got to admit, no matter how you look at this, basic physics does not allow space to be a vacuum. It's just not scientifically possible. Where does this vacuum begin? In 2013, an astronaut almost drowned while on a spacewalk. What? Why would he drown while on a spacewalk? This is one, just an extract from the NASA report. Water fills the empty space helmet of Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano in August 27, 2013. Tested the faulty spacewalking gear, which forced NASA to abort a July 16 spacewalk for safety reasons. The water leak confirmed that NASA will help NASA engineer device repair methods for the spacesuits. Well, it's badly written. In any case, just what's going on here? An astronaut nearly drowns on a spacewalk? And this reminds me that we often confuse gravity-free with a vacuum. The two are not the same. That you can have gravity or things sucking you down or keeping you to the surface in a vacuum. You don't need to have, just because you're in a vacuum doesn't mean things are floating around. Okay, so separate the two. So what can you do and can't you do in a vacuum? Well, first of all, in a vacuum, sound doesn't travel. Explosions don't happen. Fire doesn't happen. Propulsion, the way we see jet propulsion, does not happen in a vacuum. And if you've watched any of these guys on YouTube claiming that they've created a vacuum chamber and they prove that you can do this, they're just as idiotic as those that told us that you can do these things in a vacuum. Because you can't simulate the infinite space, the infinite vacuum of space in a bloody vacuum chamber in your garage. You know, it's got boundaries to it. Space is infinite vacuum. Not the same as a little vacuum chamber in your bloody garage. You can't have jet engines. You can't have astronauts going. Doesn't work, dude. None of that stuff works. It'll work in water, but it ain't going to work in a vacuum. What I found interesting, I was watching SpaceX launch a rocket the other day, and they had this very well-trained woman talking about what the rocket was doing, and oh boy, she had all the language, all the lingo, all the expressions, and at one stage she said, and the rocket is about to the rocket is about to enter the vacuum of space. That's what she said. About to enter the vacuum. Really, where? Can you point out, be more specific? Where is it about to enter the vacuum of space? And then when I started looking at this, it's just like, why do the rockets never go straight up? Like, go and look this way yourself. What is the shortest way from here to space? Straight up, right? No, that doesn't happen. It never goes up. It always goes, and then it goes up. I don't know where they go, but they go over there. Watch the 1969 landing on the moon, Apollo 11, the launch and the landing on the moon. The whole 3 hours is on YouTube, even with the ads as they were flighted in 1969. It's quite trippy to watch it. And within 3 minutes of the launch of Apollo 11, it's flying horizontally at 102 miles, and it's heading away from cameras, until the cameras can no longer pick it up, and the jets who were flying next to it lose sight of it. At which point they cut to the studio, and the announcer in the studio says, well, we can no longer keep up with the rocket. We're now going to switch to animation mode. Bingo. So by now you should know that NASA lies. And if you don't believe that NASA has been lying to us for so many years, please watch Jay Widener's Kubrick Odyssey. If you haven't seen this yet, realize that all the moon stuff was shot here in London, Pinewood Studios, I think it was, where Stanley Kubrick shot Space Odyssey 2001. Watch Kubrick Odyssey. You will never believe anything about the moon landing ever again. And that brings us to the question, what is the moon? And I will leave you pondering that thought until we come back from our little break. So we left off on a little cliffhanger. The question was, what is the moon? Since now those that have done their research will know that any of the pictures we've been shown from the moon are a lie. We've never really been to the moon. And thanks to Stanley Kubrick and the movie that he then made to tell us that he shot the moon landings, and that movie was called Shining, thank you, The Shining. I've watched this documentary 12 times and I still forget the name of that movie. With Jack Nicholson, really strange movie. When I saw that movie, I thought, what is this all about? Now, once you realize what it's about, you realize why it's so bloody weird. Stanley Kubrick telling us. So what is the moon? Well, once you've seen the moon wave, or the lunar wave, that was first shot in 2012, you'll never think of the moon as the same again. Because whatever that is that we're looking at up in the sky is not what we think it is. Here's a quick introduction for those of you that have never seen the lunar wave. Pay attention, because I'm not sure how clear this is with the lights on it, but they had to put the light on, otherwise you wouldn't see me. And so you'll see the moon every so often, especially during equinoxes and solstices. Very high regular activity of this weird wave, like a computer rebooting or old computer screens. It's this electronic wave that moves over the moon. And this is called the lunar wave. And it displaces objects and images on the moon, so clearly whatever we're looking at is probably not real. So here's the lunar wave.
All right, welcome to the Crow Discovery Project. Again, this is the 2012 lunar wave footage, the best example of the lunar wave that we have, and I'm going to show you some things that sharp-eyed followers have spotted long, long ago and that I have talked about, but I have never taken the time to carefully illustrate. And what I'm going to show you here means an awful lot, but I'm also going to show the pulses that happen in the lower left limb of the moon. So watch the lower left there, and I'm just going to run a straight slowed down view, 30%. If you've got sharp eyes, you'll see what we detected on a 60-inch monitor. Now look inside the circle. There's a pulse that goes from lower left to upper right, and in the next circle, the yellow one, there's a lateral sweep that goes from left to right, straight across the screen. And this is all going on as the wave is starting at the bottom. So now look at the pulses backwards and forwards. That's backwards, this is forwards, coming from the lower left limb of the moon. You can see the pulses now that I've put filters on them, how they have a curved aspect to them. And if you've got sharp eyes, you'll see the sweep up above. Now what I'm going to show you now, we have talked about, and many sharp-eyed viewers have known that this was an important thing about this clip for a long time. Here comes the wave. Look at the dark underlying crater in the center of your screen. Watch how it's displaced, almost like you're looking through water. There goes the wave backwards, forwards, the wave hits the crater, displaces. This wave is displacing, as if you were looking through water, the entire image of the moon. Now I've never taken the time to animate this, I have talked about it. There it is zoomed in. Now this is running at 30%, and I'm going to zoom out. There goes the wave to the top, and there's going to be another wave coming in from the bottom. Now I'm going to run this at 30%, so as the wave comes in, you can choose any landmark you want. Here comes the wave from the bottom to the top. Choose any little landmark you can see there, and watch it be displaced. Now that round-looking ring crater, forwards, backwards, backwards, and one more time forward, and I'll zoom out, and you can watch it go all the way to the top. Again, this is at 30% with quite a few filters like find edge and some other things, invert.
So, say no more. Whatever we thought the moon was, it's probably not what it is, and it might just be a hologram covering something up there in the sky. I don't know. Like I said, the deeper we go down this rabbit hole, the stranger things become. And the things that we held dear, and I got so excited when I first, saw the Mars landings and rover, and I went, wow, this is so exciting. We landed on another planet. Now I don't believe a bloody word of that anymore. Really. Because when I started researching the Mars, now that I know the moon landing is a hoax, I started researching the Mars landings, and you realize that it's just as big a hoax. And it seems that pretty much everything we've ever seen from so-called Mars was probably shot on Devon Island, very far in northern Canada. And when you start getting into this, it is exactly the footage that you see on Devon Island is the same footage that we've been shown as being on Mars. So, do with this information what you want, go and research this a lot deeper. I can talk a lot more about it, but that's not what we hear about. We hear about sharing more knowledge and information, not to try and disprove things like that. It's just more lies and deceptions. So through all the lies and deceptions, there seems to be one common denominator that remains the source of all things, and that is sound, resonance, and frequency. It's the thing that holds everything together. Modern science tells us that we live in an electromagnetic universe, and that everything spins and vibrates. And even in that little statement, there is a little bit of deception, and you'll understand why. Everything spins and vibrates, except the moon, of course. And the electromagnetic universe is often presented like this, with charts like this, with a little squiggle on top, and that's supposed to represent frequency and vibration and resonance. Wow. It's amazing. But what we can detect from this, or deduce from this, is that everything in creation has what is referred to as prime resonance frequency. Everything vibrates at its own very specific frequency, like that sand on the metal plate. Sound and resonance are common links of creation and religion. Christianity, it's the word, it's the it's the song of the Egyptians, it's the Aboriginal 3 sacred songs that brought everything into creation. And in sacred geometry, we have the creation process, that's the 6 days of creation, or the word, sound, frequency. We have the 6 aspects of Om, and the Om Mani Padme Hum. We have the 6 aspects of the all-seeing eye of Horus, all resonance, ratio frequencies, harmonics. And we realize that sound is the source of all creation. Remember, after all, it says, God said, let there be light. That itself becomes important because it's sound that comes before light. And you'll understand why that is such an important thing. And why we don't live in an electromagnetic universe. In there is a subtle deception. Prime resonance frequency seems to be the source code for everything. And the principles of resonance are that everything vibrates, as I said, at its own frequency. And that's obviously also relevant to our own bodies. Every cell, every atom, every organ, every muscle, every part of your body has its own vibrational frequency. And if those parts of your body are not in coherent harmonic resonance, they are in dissonance, which means they're in dis-ease, and dis-ease is disease, sick. That's why we get sick, because we're not coherent, we're not resonating with our environment, and even within our own bodies. And this is all beautifully shown in the Hans Jenny's spectacular work in the 60s, which he called cymatics. If you haven't seen that yet, go onto YouTube, you can watch the whole documentary there. It is quite spectacular when you see it for the first time. Well, every time it's evenly spectacular. We've already shown how sound manifests into physical form, but it's also the human voice that has infinite creation capacity. It's when we look at the cymoscope, and I now see that you can get a cymoscope app on your phone, so you can actually download that cymoscope app if you can, and then you can actually see how your own voice manifests an infinite number of shapes and frequencies. That means we have the infinite capacity to create, because we're capable of creating infinite shapes with our sounds, with our sound of our voices. Just if you haven't seen this, very quickly. Every minute intonation has its own shape. So sound is the precursor to an electromagnetic universe. That's really important because it's sound that came first. Much more about that. Sound inspires religious symbols. When you drill into some of these still images of the cymatic patterns, you find the source of religious symbols, this beautiful cross in a circle. And you realize that those that first drew the crosses in ancient times knew exactly what they were doing. And they knew that sound was the source of creation, and that's why their symbols and logos look like this. They weren't designed by ad agencies like the logos companies are designed today. They knew what they were doing. So sound and resonance, sound creates light, sound levitates, boils water, creates DNA, heals and destroys pathogens. Sound moves beyond the speed of light. There's a thing called hypersound and Caesar technology, which we're going to talk a lot more about. Sound makes things invisible. Sound energizes the water and the air. Water we drink and the air we breathe. Otherwise we would not survive if we just breathe air without it actually being energized. And sound is a precursor to the electromagnetic universe, or precursor to electromagnetism. Ancient civilizations knew all this, and they used and understood sound, and they used sound and frequency as a source of energy. Sound and frequency was used to control and manipulate humanity in ancient times like it is today in modern times. The ancients did not waste their time with insignificant carvings or doodles. When they carved things into rock, they were very specific with the information they left for us. And it seems that they took control of humanity with what I've recognized as cone-shaped tools. And this is why, subconsciously, when I found those cone-shaped tools scattered around the mountains of South Africa, close to the stone circles, I started to collect them and photograph them, because I knew subconsciously that this was connected to our origins, to advanced technology, and to how we've been manipulated. This is very important, these images of them, these bird-headed beings and these winged beings holding these cones and doing something with these weird cone-shaped tools. It seems to me that they were controlling not only the pineal gland, but also the DNA, so-called tree of life with sound and frequency. Notice this weird wristwatch of this being and this cone. See this cone? At first you look at this and you think, oh, it's just a muscle. No, it's not a muscle, it's a cone. A cone-shaped thing that runs, I'll nearly fall off the stage here. It runs right. There's your cone running into this weird wristwatch, right? And notice that wristwatch has got a bunch of little cones facing the center. And we realize how they were controlling humanity with cone-shaped tools, sound and frequency, and the encoded symbolisms are still encoded in those that control us with sound and frequency today. It's all around us. Sound is a tool and technology. Sound creates light. It is God that said, let there be light. The sound of the Creator that brings forth light. And it's interesting, in a recent documentary done by Corey Good, he talks about this underground cavern that he went into, these huge hydroponic systems, and there was light source. There was a source of light, and when he asked where the light was coming from, the woman said it was produced by sound. The light was produced by sound, and there's a lot more where this comes from. The Ankh was just a healing device, a frequency resonating healing device. Clearly they're doing some healing on this little dude, individual, and so much more. The medicine wheel in Native American culture is just a cross in a circle that tells us the Native Americans, medicine men, knew that sound is a healer, that it's sound that heals. The Ark of the Covenant was clearly an example of advanced technology, in gold, obviously. It was obviously a communication device, and Moses is told to sit between the cherubim on the mercy seat. I don't know why it was a mercy seat, but he had to sit there, and then God would tell Moses what to, he'd give him instructions and tell him, when he sat there, what to tell the Israelites. Not only was it a communication device, but it was also obviously a tool or a weapon, because it defeated large armies and brought down the walls of Jericho, all with sound and resonance. If you read your Bible, you'll understand how that worked. Royal Rife, obviously the man who found the cure for all disease, with his prime resonance frequency, destroyed the cancer cells and pathogens in the body. A lot written about him and how he did it. And this is actually a book that is in a library in Sedona, Arizona, which is Royal Rife's handwritten work. I sat there, photographed as many pages as I could. There's all his handwritten frequencies for all the different diseases that he identified. So it exists. So I'm asking myself, all these people that are putting out these Rife machines, where did they get their information from? Because in this book is where all the frequencies are written. I don't know if they got a hold of this book, but so I'll never know whether these Rife machines that you buy on the internet or wherever are, how well they work or not. But I guess some of them do work, because people do report great success with some of them. And then obviously George Lakhovsky's multiple wave oscillator, which some people believe is even better than the Rife resonator, because it cures pretty much everything. And in fact, the guy that has got that book, this book in his library, cured his father with a multiple wave oscillator and light treatment, just light, cured his father of quadriplegia. Okay, that's not something you cure. I've seen the hospital report. His father entered the hospital quadriplegic. He left 6 weeks later on crutches. The hospital report says he displayed a remarkable recovery. That's all the hospital report says. It's astounding. And what Stephen, the guy that owns this library, what he basically did for about a month, he went every day and for about 45 minutes ran a small handheld multiple wave oscillator up and down his father's spine, and then exposed him to different colored lights that he figured out which lights, and that's also available, that information, for about another 45 minutes. And he did this for about 4 weeks, and then 6 weeks later his father walked out of the hospital on crutches. This guy here, Anthony Holland, in 2011 held a TED talk where he shows us and he tells us the frequencies that kill cancer cells. And here are the frequencies, just a quick look at this. He tells us that between 100,000 and 300,000 hertz. So we now have a range at which cancer cells are destroyed. When I saw this, I thought, okay, well, that's it. Now this is the end of the pharmaceutical control of, cancer drug treatment. No, Anthony Holland is gone. He's struggling to survive, as far as I know, and he's desperately trying to get his research out onto the market. It's not happening. That's how tightly controlled this entire pharmaceutical and energy systems are. Those are the two most guarded areas of research, obviously, is the energy and the pharmaceuticals.
These are the first videos taken. We showed these videos to our friends in the biology department. They said they hadn't seen anything quite like it. Seems to be a new phenomenon. These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. This is a harmless organism, almost friendly, a little blepharisma. And normally they're very fast swimmers, but when you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. So first we attack pancreatic cancer. Take a good look at this slide, because the next one will look quite different. After we treat these cells, they change their shape and size, and they begin to grow long, rope-like structures out the sides. They look something like antennas. I call them bioantennas, for biological antennas. It's as if the cancer cells are trying to tune into our signal. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies.
You got the gist of that? Sound levitates, but it's not this levitation. So just a quick suggestion how sound levitates. This is already quite an old video, but still one of the best examples. I spoke to David Deek, actually, he lives on Long Island, and he told me about how they did this experiment and how excited they got and how incredibly sensitive it is, how you can make those things do whatever you want. You can make them turn around, tumble, spin, whatever you want to do. You can control those things, but that is not how the ancients levitated stuff. This is just pressure waves inside of a closed container. But it does make us imagine how it works. See how they make it spin with a very gentle frequency change. John Keeley did amazing stuff in 1888 already. You can go and look at his work with his musical dynasphere. He levitated stuff. He drilled holes with sound into rock. He pulverized giant blocks into finest powder within minutes. We struggle with it. I mean, I worked in the mining industry when I was at university because I grew up on the mines in South Africa. I'd come home for the vacs and go and work in the mines, laboratories and on the mines to earn some money. And sometimes I'd have to walk into these giant warehouses where they had these huge drums, the size of the stage, big circular sort of drums filled with rocks. And then there were these metal balls inside, and that's how they crush the ore when they get it from out of the ground. They put them in those drums, and they roll the ore in these giant drums. When you walk in there, the sound of those drums makes you want to vomit. It is so loud, and the energy in those huge places is so toxic that you literally want to vomit when you walk in there. So everybody there wears earmuffs, and I don't know how people actually can work in there. And I forgot my train of thought while I went there. Completely forgot my train of thought. Never mind. What the hell? Levitation. Oh, sorry. So this is the trouble that our mining companies go to crush rock, right? John Keeley did that in a few minutes. Giant blocks of rock with sound frequency into a fine talcum powder. Peter Davey in New Zealand was boiling water from 1940 with sound frequencies. I met a guy in 2012 or 11 in the USA at Contact in the Desert. After I presented this, and he said, "Oh no, man, I worked for Boeing in the 80s, and Boeing, in the secret part of Boeing development, and we were actually developing weaponry with sound and resonance, and we discovered the frequency that boils water." He says, "But that's obviously very dangerous because if you expose yourself to the frequency that boils water, your body explodes. So it's something that you don't want to really mess with because your body is made up with mostly water. So you better make sure that you can focus and control that frequency in a contained environment, otherwise you're in deep trouble." And, indeed we don't think about this, right? Oh, wow. But yet Peter Davey managed to do this in that little resonator of his. And he did it. If you go on YouTube and watch it. A magnetron is just a resonance energy generating device. I spoke about it earlier. That's why it's called a resonant cavity magnetron. A resonant cavity. Resonance. Sound acts as a cloak of invisibility. If you expose things to certain frequencies, they become invisible. This weird plastic pyramid is an example that was shown that when they exposed it to a certain frequency, everything they put underneath it disappeared, made it invisible. And that's what I thought, well, maybe this is what inspired the Eastern architecture. What happens in the monasteries and these temples, a bunch of people get together and they chant and they hum, and maybe at a certain frequency the whole bloody monastery disappears. If this little pyramid can do it, maybe this is actually the reason why these ancient places were built like this. So they could actually chant and make the whole thing disappear. They go into a different dimension. Sound creates hurricanes. In 2003, a patent was submitted for the creation of hurricanes. Sound creates supercluster galaxies. In 2003, NASA points out a supercluster galaxy that resonates at 57 octaves below middle C in B flat. And this is what the image looks like that they show us of the supercluster galaxy that resonates at B flat. And what do you see? It looks just like lycopodium powder on a vibrating metal plate, just on a gigantic scale. It's just sound, resonance, vibration, as above, so below. It just gets smaller and gets bigger. Remember when you look at the sound resonating on the metal plate, the higher the frequency, the more dense it is, the lower the frequency, the bigger it is. So if this thing resonates at, 57 octaves below middle C, that's large. Sound extinguishes fire. It's like every time I look at this video clip, I think to myself, what happened to these poor guys? They came up with a solution for all fire departments around the world. Fire trucks could literally pull up to a burning building, put up these ladders with speakers on it, and put out the fire within seconds. That doesn't happen, right? Because that's not good for business. It's not good for damage, for building, for hospital bills, for trauma, for counseling. It's not good for business. We cannot put out fires with sound. It's not going to happen, and yet it's quite possible.
We're both graduating from the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at George Mason University. This company
Literally, I think 5 seconds, and that fire is out. Just watch this.
uses sound frequencies to extinguish flames.
I see this device being applied to a lot of things. First off, I think in the kitchen, it can be on top of a stovetop. But eventually, I'd like to see this applied to maybe swarm robotics, where it be attached to a drone, and that would be applied to forest fires or even building fires, where you wouldn't want to sacrifice human life.
5 seconds.
Professor Brian Mark really stepped in to help us.
5 seconds, that fire was out. Sound energizes the air we breathe. Now, I've spent 5 years at medical school studying pharmaceutics. Not once did I actually understand how this whole breathing thing and the red blood cells, and that's never explained. Because they don't know. They haven't figured it out. It's just, this is how it works, this is what happens. Like, cells die. Why? We don't know, they die. We breathe in oxygen, and that oxygen energizes, and we use the oxygen, and then we breathe the oxygen out. Well, what happens to the oxygen? Why is the oxygen we breathe in better than the oxygen we breathe out? Because as we breathe the oxygen in, it goes into our lungs, and it spirals into our lungs like everything else. It spirals in through the bronchi, and eventually smaller and smaller orifices, and eventually ends up in the alveoli. By the time the sound that you breathe in, or the air that you breathe in, and the sound of the air. Have you ever been next to a very loud breather when they sleep? We make a lot of noise when we breathe, but we don't hear it until you put your ear to your mouth and you realize how loud your breathing is. And it's the sound of the breathing that energizes the air that we breathe as it goes into our lungs. It's a spectacular, advanced technological wonder our bodies are. And that's what energizes the air, and then it goes into your blood, and we use the frequency and the energy of the oxygen in our blood, and once we've used that energy and depleted it, it stops to vibrate. We breathe the oxygen out again, and it recycles itself. Luc Montagnier in 2011 spontaneously generated DNA out of water with frequency. And then later, he reconstituted a virus via a telephone line from Paris to Italy. You can check that little documentary on YouTube. It's quite spectacular. He won a Nobel Prize, Luc Montagnier. And then we get to sonoluminescence, or star in a jar, sound in water that creates this beautiful, bright light in the water, like I showed earlier. So sound is the ultimate source of free energy. So if we're looking for free energy, we've got to look at sound and resonance. And that's what I believe Nikola Tesla found out, and he just rediscovered what the ancients did in South Africa with the stone circles and all the other ancient sites. Picking up the subtle frequencies of the earth, amplifying it in the top of the tower that he put up on Long Island, and from there he could transmit those radiant energies to wherever he wanted to. Magnets create sound. We know what speaker magnets look like. Many of us would have worked with that speaker magnets, taken it apart. So it's the speaker magnets that work in a speaker. It works both ways. You either create an electronic pulse, and it vibrates, creates an effect on the speaker. It moves the air, but it can also work the other way. The air and the sound can create light. So sound and magnetism are inextricably connected. Sound first. Sound never stands still, it moves. Sound creates magnetic fields. Moving magnetic fields create electromagnetic fields and electricity. So we live in a magneto-electric universe, not an electromagnetic universe. Can you see the subtle difference? If we are taught at school that we live in a magneto-electric universe, it changes the way we think. It's a very little subtle deception, and yet it's a very important deception. It keeps us thinking the other way around. And that brings us to my favorite new obsession, and that is what I call the particle physics agenda. And when this little bubble burst on me, I literally couldn't sleep for weeks. I spent weeks staying up at night researching this explosion of quantum mechanics and the obsession with particle physics. And it truly is a spectacular awakening when you realize how deep the deception goes and how far back this has been planned for us. It goes back 500 years, and it's connected to almost everything in our mainstream science and technology today, is this particle physics agenda. Here's the rat pack, the quantum mechanics rat pack, picture taken in 1927. There's only one woman there, Madame Curie. Otherwise, all these guys. And where is she? She's in there somewhere. Oh, there she is on the left. I mean, from obviously Albert Einstein right in the middle to Niels Bohr to Planck to Heisenberg. I mean, they're all there. All the quantum mechanics geniuses. Think about this. You know, when Heisenberg won his Nobel Prize, he was like, I think he was 25 years old. And then he gets put in charge of a major university. Can you imagine what that does to your ego? Who was funding all this stuff? Who was funding all these people in those days? And you start to go back, follow the money, follow that clue, and you see where this is all coming from, who manipulated it, who controlled it, who used the results, and so forth. And I'm starting to realize now that these poor guys may have been brilliant human beings, but unfortunately, it was in a time where their ideas, their thoughts could not be shared with the world unless it came via the mainstream publishing houses and the mainstream universities and the mainstream newspapers that published whatever the hell they wanted about that specific scientist and researcher. They published what they wanted according to their agenda. And you could never go back to, no, I didn't say that. They didn't care. They published what they wanted. And that's when you start seeing this perfect unfolding. That's why they promoted this kind of thing. And these major events, they paid for it. They, you know who they are. The banking families, the people with the money. So this is a spectacular thing has been unfolding, but even long before this. So this brings us to the search of the God particle. Now the standard scientific model of the standard model basically is described as this. Physicists explain the properties and forces between elementary particles in terms of the standard model, a widely accepted framework for understanding almost everything in the known universe. Almost everything in the known universe, other than gravity. Ah, I see. So we understand almost everything, but we have no idea what gravity is, which is a separate theory altogether. The theory of gravity, general relativity, is used for gravity. So they had to create a whole new theory to explain what gravity is, and that doesn't quite reconcile with the rest of the standard model of the theory of physics and the laws of nature around us. So already we have a conflict of interest here. They come up with all kinds of interesting names. Like my favorite name is like not only the God particle, the Higgs boson, but then once they discovered that, then they had to come up with other smaller particles like the gluon. The gluon is a particle that actually holds everything together. We can't even explain what the strong force is in the center of the nucleus, because that strong force should preclude any atomic structure from actually remaining intact. But that's, hey, we just, you know, as long as we give it a name. What is it called? Oh, it's called the strong force. Oh, it's a strong force. We know what that is. Strong force. No, we have no bloody idea how the strong force works and why it exists. But yet, that is the fundamental principle upon which we based our science and the stuff that we teach our children in the schools and brainwash us into oblivion, so we have no idea how things work. And you can trace this whole particle physics agenda all the way back to 1492, when Earth was presented as a particle for the very first time. A little tiny little ball floating in space, created by Martin of Boheme for the King of Portugal in 1952. That has never been seen before. And I believe this is how far back the particle physics agenda goes. Then we get caught up in the most expensive chase for a particle ever, the God particle or the Higgs boson. And luckily, thank goodness for this brilliant work by the guys at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN. Thank God that in 2013 we finally found the God particle, otherwise we'd be in deep trouble. Really. So the Large Hadron Collider at CERN is a spectacular device. This is the length that these guys go to promote their particle physics agenda. You've got to try and digest this, people. This is not a small thing. This is a very, very large thing. Remember we said the larger, the bigger the lie, the more we're inclined to believe it? Well, this is one of those very, very big lies. This is the biggest machine ever built. The Large Hadron Collider is the world's largest and most powerful particle collider, the most complex experimental facility ever built, and the largest single machine ever built, 17 miles long. What they do there, it's a circular structure. It looks something like this, and basically they shoot particles in opposite directions and hope that they hit each other. That's what they do. And obviously all this is done with computers, and fortunately, when was it? In March 2013, they managed to do this, right? And they had to find this God particle, because without the God particle, we'd be in big trouble, because that means that we wouldn't have a medium in which particles actually exist in space. Because Peter Higgs, the guy that proposed the whole Higgs boson, also proposed that there needs to be a medium necessary for particles to exist. But unfortunately, that problem was created in the 1800s because they needed why did they need a God particle? Sorry, I'm getting confused here with my slide order. They need a God particle because in 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is by then the most advanced experiment in science ever done up to that point. This was like the equivalent of landing on Mars, right? The Michelson-Morley experiment showed that there is no ether. The ether was the substance in all of human history, from the ancient Greeks to everyone, to Einstein and Nikola Tesla, all talk about the ether is this invisible energy field that holds everything together, right? Without the ether, nothing can exist. So they needed to find, because in 1887, Michelson-Morley experiment showed that the ether did not exist. So they needed to replace the ether with some other medium in which particles exist. So the God particle, can you see this ridiculous insanity? They had to find the God particle proposed by Peter Higgs, the Higgs boson, because then there'd be evidence of the Higgs field that exists. So they get rid of the ether and they replace it with the Higgs field, or the matrix, as it was also called. And the plot thickens. Unfortunately, thank God for people like Nikola Tesla, because if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And that's exactly what this is all about. This is a picture of an electron, a beam of light, an electron riding a beam of light. It's really quite a spectacular image. Can you see anything physical there? You see a particle? No, you just see ripples in a pond, like when you just dropped a pebble in a pond. You see waves in a pond. We don't see a particle, we just see resonance and frequency. Nikola Tesla said that sound is the source of everything. In this interview in 1928, this is what he says. On the whole subject of matter, Dr. Tesla holds views that are startlingly original. He disagrees with the concept or the accepted atomic theory of matter and does not believe in the existence of an electron as pictured by science. Tesla also tells us of the importance of 3, 6, and 9. If you only knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, you would know the key to the universe. Well, anyone that studies 3, 6, and 9, or vortex maths, or toroidal fields, will know that 3, 6, and 9 are the fundamental numbers of vortex maths, or toroidal fields. So Tesla is telling us that everything and the magnificence of creation is based on toroidal fields. This is really important. Even Albert Einstein had a problem with the existence of the electron. And he says that the electron, based on the current understanding of science and physics, the electron cannot exist because it completely contradicts our current understanding of the basic principles of science and physics. I'm not going to read that complicated thing because that's really what it says. And then Ed Leeds-Kalman, the guy that built Coral Castle in southern Florida, he makes it very clear in his book that millions of people all over the world are being fooled by the non-existing electron. And he goes into much more details. What's going on here? What's going on here that we've been completely manipulated and lied to about everything. And the bigger the lie, the more we're inclined to believe it. Dr. Manjir Samantha Lawton, who I actually met here in Manchester in 2013, wrote this incredible book, which I suggest you read, called Punk Science. It's an awesome book. It reads like a novel. You won't put it down once you start. In which she shows us how everything manifests in toroidal fields. Toroidal shapes and toroidal fields. And you start realizing that everything in creation manifests in a toroidal field. Everything. Sound manifests as a torus. And this is why every beat of our heart creates this very powerful toroidal field around our body. This is why we measure magnetic and electromagnetic fields around our body, because of not only the beating heart and the sound of the beating heart, but also the movement of the blood through our body, creating toroidal fields. The toroidal shape of sound. Every sound frequency, every vowel, every letter of the alphabet has its own specific toroidal field. And sound and the toroidal fields that are created by sound is also how scalar technology works. Scalar waves are actually toroidal fields. Toroidal shape of color. Colors have toroidal shapes. Things are getting more and more interesting. And then when you want to start seeing the manifestation of sound and shapes, in how shapes on paper and in carvings, actually what frequency they create, please watch Eric Rankin's Sonic Geometry, the full, I think it's a half an hour to 45-minute documentary. It'll blow your mind. This is just a short little excerpt. Eric lives in Laguna Beach, California. I visit him every year when I go on my tour of the USA. This is a spectacular breakthrough documentary.
As an experiment, let's take a look at the numbers found in basic geometric shapes, then apply those numbers as vibration cycles to hear the tones they produce. First, let's listen to what the 180 total degrees contained in a triangle sound like. And here's a squares and circles 360 in cycles per second. A perfect octave up from the triangle. What about the pentagon at 540? That sounds like a harmonic fifth of the other two. That's interesting. What are these tones? They are F sharp and its perfect harmonic fifth of C sharp. Let's keep going. What does a hexagon 720 sound like? Another F sharp. Here's a 7-sided septagon, which totals 900. This is an A sharp, which happens to be the note required to complete an F sharp major chord in perfect 3-part harmony. And finally the octagon, where we get 1080, another C sharp. Suddenly, geometry is expressed by tones, and these tones just happen to create the most beautiful form of music, a perfect 3-part major chord in the key of F sharp.
So you get an idea how shapes in nature and sacred geometry actually represents harmonics and resonance and coherence. And if we're in dissonance with that, then we're in dis-ease. So now we continue busting the dogma of science, and remember that science just really means knowledge. So anybody that's knowledgeable about anything is a scientist. Scientists are not men in lab coats and laboratories. That's part of the hijacking of the word science by mainstream academia. So there are no particles, everything just originates in a toroidal field of resonance. So an electron is just simply a coherent resonance in a toroidal field. And that applies to everything else. The electron model the electron is a torus. The atom is a torus, and I just recently had Professor Ilya Lakitsevich in South Africa at the Ubuntu Festival, and he's written dozens of articles on the toroidal fields of atoms, not the atomic model that we get taught at school. That's a complete lie and a myth. It's a theory. Here's a molecular torus of a carbon monoxide. Pay attention to this. I just found this today. I just actually amended this morning. Look at that structure there, the toroidal field of the molecular torus of a carbon monoxide molecule. And then I found the fact that magnetic fields are actually cone-shaped. And look at the image. Pay attention to this image here. And then the image of a magnetic field. And you see the comparison. The fact that toroidal fields and magnetic fields have the same kind of structure. Because that's what it is. Sound creates magnetic fields create toroidal field. They're all toroidal, so they're inextricable. They're inseparable. The solar system is a torus, a toroidal field. Our galaxy is a toroidal field. Basically, we live in a fractal, multidimensional, toroidal nature of reality. This is an image by a brilliant scientist, Alex Gray, which probably resembles our reality most accurately. This infinite fractal toroidal field. And here's just a quick introduction to magnetic fields and magnetism, because we don't think of magnetism for what it really is, and everything is magnetic. If it resonates, which everything does, it has to create a magnetic field around itself. So everything is sound and magnetics.
Might not think of water as being magnetic, but it is. And so are graphite, aluminum, and glass.
This is a new and different category of magnetism called either para or diamagnetism, and it's different from the magnetism that you're used to. You're probably already familiar with ferromagnetism. Ferro means iron. An unmagnetized piece of iron, or nickel or cobalt, becomes a magnet in the presence of a magnetic field. The effect is strong and lasts even after the magnet is removed. Paramagnetism is a similar effect, except that it's much weaker and temporary. Aluminum is a good example of a paramagnet. And so is oxygen, which is attracted to magnets. Here, I have a few milliliters of liquid oxygen, which sticks to the magnet. I'll explain why later. Gadolinium oxide and cupric sulfate are good examples of paramagnetic substances. Cupric sulfate is a salt that can be picked up by a magnet. Diamagnetic materials are exactly the opposite of paramagnetic. They are always repulsed. They would rather die than be in a magnetic field.
An important example of a diamagnetic material is graphite. This specially made pyrolytic graphite is repelled by a magnetic field. Don't be confused. This is not static electricity or eddy currents. Graphite is repelled by a magnet, always, both by the north and south end. Pyrolytic graphite is a grown crystal of flat carbon layers which maximizes the diamagnetic effect.
That's cool.
Of course, the best diamagnets are superconductors, which at low temperatures provide exact opposite repulsion to whatever magnetic field is present when they're chilled. They are perfect diamagnets.
The most famous and powerful diamagnetic is bismuth, element number 83 on the periodic table. The bismuth-powered boat sails toward the weaker magnetic fields.
Okay, you get the gist of that. Magnetic fields create toroidal shapes. You can see it very clearly, even just if you put iron filings. And now we get to the real crux of it. Magnetism manifests as a toroidal field. Sound is a toroidal. Sound is a torus. Color is a torus. Everything is a bloody torus. And so is a magnetic field. This is a perfectly balanced, fully magnetic field spectrum. And this is how our nature of reality is manifested in this world of ours, in this existence of ours. We're told that it's the sound of the earth that creates the magnetic fields. It is not the molten iron core, as we've been told. There is no molten iron core at the center of the earth, because even in there lies is a lie, because molten iron does not have a magnetic field. So there can't be molten iron at the center of the earth. So it's clearly the sound of the earth, and we know that the earth resonates all the time, it rings like a bell, and it's that sound that creates the magnetic field around the earth. But, let me go back here. The magnetic torus is a perfectly balanced thing. It pushes and it pulls from both sides. It's the same force moving in the opposite directions. It's not positive or negative. It's the same field. It moves in the opposite direction. So even the concept of positive and negative is a lie and deception. It's just the same energy that works in the opposite direction. In fact, the yin-yang sign is most likely a flattened 2D perspective of a balanced toroidal field. Right? Imagine the yin-yang sign. So it's very important to understand that the toroidal fields, and then at the center of the toroidal field we have the accretion disk. And so the sound of the earth is a problem, because we have half a magnetic field floating around in space, not a fully balanced magnetic field. We have north on the one side and south on the other. That's not possible. That is not a balanced magnetic torus. That's a half a magnetic torus. And there's a big problem with that. So what's going on? Because balanced magnetic fields, a balanced complete magnetic torus looks something like this. We got these toroidal fields moving inwards with an accretion disk at the center of it. Here's another example. A toroidal torus equator plane emits energy and matter in a disk, just like our solar system emits matter in a disk. And you start seeing, when you study this, once again, NASA tells us all this information. It keeps talking about solar disks and how new stars are created emitting in solar disks, in these made out of water. When you start going into this, it talks about how water creates these solar disks. And here's a most detailed image of a young star and its planetary disk being formed. Everything's created in a disk, the galactic disks. The galactic torus has a galactic disk. We talk about the galactic equator or the galactic plane, and we're told that our solar system crosses the galactic plane. Well, that's the galactic disk in which all the matter lies in the galaxy. We have thousands of images of galactic disks floating around in space, and we don't think that's weird. We're completely okay with that. It's just part of a giant galactic torus. We just see the disk part of it. We don't see the other energetic things about it. Every now and then we do, when we use special technology to visualize things. We see the torus, and we start reading more about the dynamics of galactic disks and so forth. You can take this right down the rabbit hole when you start looking into this. And then, fortunately, through the discovery of the ferro-lens cell, we start to be able to see what magnetic fields look like and what a magnetic torus actually looks like. When you put a magnet under a ferrocell lens, you start seeing the beautiful flow of the energies. And I suggest that this is what ley lines really are. Ley lines are actually a misunderstanding or a misconception by Mr. Ley, who first discovered it, after whom ley lines are called. He only really discovered the magnetic fields of the toroidal nature of our reality and our world. And when you bring a magnet close to a ferrofluid, this is what happens. Beautiful cones pop up out of the ferrofluid, and you start seeing the effect of magnets and sound on the effect of nature, how sound and magnetism affects nature. And when you take a ferrocell lens and you put it over a speaker magnet, you get these beautiful cones pointing at the center. Does it remind you of something? Yes, it reminds me of this dude's wristwatch here. And the cone he's holding in his hand. And we start seeing how important the cones, the toroidal fields and the cones are in advanced technology and understanding the laws of nature. Sound, magnetism, cone-shaped tools and toruses. That's what this is all about. Really deeply encoded in the ancient civilization's knowledge.